It was an unusually cold day in San Francisco, the kind of day where the wind felt like it was slicing through every layer of clothing, chilling you to the bone. Charlie stood at the corner of Fifth Street, his back pressed against a nearby building to block out some of the wind. His cardboard sign, which read, "Can you spare $1 for a coffee?" rested against his feet. He had been standing in this exact spot for hours, feeling the familiar numbness creeping into his hands and legs, the hunger gnawing at his stomach. The routine was something he had grown used to, sitting, waiting, hoping. His eyes shifted around, scanning the crowd. The city was busy as always, people rushing to their destinations, their faces locked in the familiar expressions of impatience. In a way, it was easy for Charlie to blend into the background. His life on the streets had faded into a cycle: wake up, beg for some change, maybe find food, maybe not. He had learned not to expect much. He had learned not to hope. Charlie wasn't always this way. He used to have a job, a family, a house. But those things seemed like a distant memory now. The tech company he worked for had shut down, and with it, his life had spiraled out of control. Drugs and alcohol had followed, and after a failed attempt at getting his life back together, he ended up on the streets, just another face in a city full of them. His family had stopped talking to him years ago, and his friends, if he could even call them that, had all moved on. He was alone. As he stood there, the cold biting at his skin, he saw a figure in the distance. At first, he thought it was just another passerby, someone rushing to get out of the cold. But as the person drew closer, something about them made Charlie look twice. The man was tall, wearing a black hoodie and sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast. He walked with purpose, his stride confident. As he got closer, Charlie's breath caught in his throat. It was him. Elon Musk. The tech mogul. The man whose name was a part of every conversation about Silicon Valley, space exploration, and electric cars. Charlie had seen him on TV, read about him in the news. But he never imagined that he would see him here, on this cold street corner, in the middle of the hustle and bustle of San Francisco. Charlie froze. What was he supposed to do? He had asked hundreds of strangers for $1, and they had either ignored him or thrown a few coins his way. But this was different. This was Elon Musk. Musk's gaze shifted to Charlie, and for a split second, their eyes locked. It was a brief moment, but in that instant, Charlie felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It was almost absurd to think that someone like Musk would stop for him, someone who had nothing to offer. But then, as if reading his mind, Musk stopped right in front of him. Charlie's mouth went dry. He had opened his mouth to say something, maybe, "Can you spare $1?" But before the words could come out, Musk spoke first. "What if I could give you more than just $1?" Musk's voice was calm, almost like he was used to making people stop and listen. "What if I could help you rebuild your life?" Charlie blinked, confusion and disbelief washing over him. Was this a joke? Was he being filmed for some reality show or social experiment? There were so many questions racing through his mind, but he could barely form any of them into words. He just stared at Musk, trying to make sense of what was happening. Musk tilted his head slightly, almost as if he was waiting for Charlie to respond. "I don't think you need just $1, he continued, his tone steady. "You need more than that. You need a chance." Charlie's heart pounded in his chest. This couldn't be real. A billionaire standing in front of him, talking about giving him a chance. It felt like a dream, a surreal moment that could never happen to someone like him. "Why would you want to help me?" Charlie finally managed to croak. His voice was hoarse, and he could feel the weight of years of failure and regret pressing down on him. Musk's lips curled into a small smile. "Because I believe everyone deserves a second chance. And I believe you can do more than just survive, you can thrive. But you have to be willing to work for it." Charlie was silent for a moment, processing what Musk had said. He felt like 1,000 thoughts were rushing through his mind, and none of them made sense. He had been down and out for so long that the idea of someone offering him an opportunity felt impossible. But here was Elon Musk, a man whose name was synonymous with space exploration, cutting-edge technology, and the future. And Musk was offering him something that, to Charlie, seemed too good to be true. Charlie's first instinct was to dismiss it, to laugh it off and walk away. But something about Musk's calm, confident demeanor made Charlie pause. There was a sincerity in his eyes that Charlie hadn't seen in a long time. People didn't usually look at him like that, like they saw potential in him. No one had ever treated him like he was worth something. "What do you mean?" Charlie finally asked, his voice shaking slightly. "What do you want from me?" Musk shrugged casually, the wind tousling his dark hair. "Nothing, really. I just want to give you an opportunity. I want to help you get back on your feet. But it's up to you to take that step." Charlie didn't know what to say. He had heard the same promises from other people before, those who had seen his potential, who had offered help, but had eventually disappeared when things got tough. Why should this be any different? What did Musk really want? Was this some kind of stunt, a way to show the world that even the rich cared about the homeless? Charlie's mind raced, but before he could say anything else, Musk added, "I'm not asking you to do anything right now. Just think about it. If you're willing to take a chance, I can help you in ways you never imagined. But it's your call." Musk turned to leave, and for a moment, Charlie was left standing there, frozen in place. The man who had once been a symbol of success, innovation, and the future had just offered him a lifeline. A second chance. But could he trust it? Before Charlie could gather his thoughts, Musk called over his shoulder, "I'll be around. Let me know what you decide." And with that, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving Charlie standing there with more questions than answers. For the first time in years, Charlie felt something stir within him, a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely lost. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. But would he take the chance? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Charlie stood there for what felt like an eternity, his cardboard sign forgotten at his feet. The world around him buzzed with the same noise, the same hurried pace that he had grown so accustomed to, but everything seemed muted now. The offer from Elon Musk echoed in his head. "I want to give you a second chance." The words rang in his ears, their meaning far more profound than anything he'd expected from a simple request for $1. Charlie's life hadn't always been like this. He hadn't always been the man standing on the streets with nothing more than a tattered coat, his sign barely legible from wear and tear. No, he had once had a life filled with promise, a life that seemed like it was heading in the right direction. But somewhere along the way, everything had come crashing down. He had grown up in a small, quiet suburb of Sacramento. His parents, though not wealthy, had always made sure that their family had everything they needed. Charlie was a bright kid, quick with numbers, and had a knack for fixing things. His parents were proud of him, often boasting to friends about how Charlie would go far in life. He was going to be someone. He was going to make them proud. After high school, Charlie attended college in San Francisco, majoring in computer science. He dove into his studies with everything he had, spending long hours in the library and often losing track of time while coding in his dorm room. It wasn't long before he landed a job as a junior software engineer at a small but promising tech startup. The company was buzzing with energy, and Charlie was right in the middle of it all. He had everything he could have wanted, his own apartment, a small but growing savings account, and the knowledge that he was on the verge of something big. His friends from college often joked that Charlie was the one with the Midas touch. He seemed to have a way of making things work, of solving problems and coming up with solutions that others missed. But for all the success, something in him felt empty. His long hours at work left little time for relationships. His personal life started to suffer, and he became more isolated, spending evenings alone in his apartment, coding late into the night. It wasn't long before Charlie started using substances to cope, first a little marijuana to relax, then alcohol to help him sleep. It seemed harmless at first, just a way to unwind after a long day. But gradually, the habits grew worse. Charlie's once perfect life began to spiral. The startup he had worked for fell into financial trouble, and suddenly, his position was on the line. Then, without warning, the company went under. He was laid off, and the security he had once felt disappeared almost overnight. With no job prospects and a worsening addiction problem, Charlie began to retreat into himself even further. He kept telling himself that things would get better, that another opportunity would come along. But they didn't. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and soon enough, Charlie found himself unable to face his parents, his friends, or anyone else from his past. He couldn't shake the shame. He couldn't bear to admit that everything he had worked for had crumbled. His addiction deepened, and his relationships fell apart. The shame of failing was unbearable, and he began to drift further and further away from the world that had once felt so full of promise. Eventually, Charlie left his apartment behind. He walked out into the streets of San Francisco, where he would spend the next few years as a homeless man. The city was a harsh reality, but it was all he had left. But even in the cold, empty streets, Charlie couldn't escape his past. The memories still haunted him, of the family dinners he missed, the birthday parties he didn't attend, and the friends who had once looked up to him. He still thought about his parents, and how disappointed they must have been in him. He couldn't bring himself to call them, to apologize. He was too far gone. Every time he passed a coffee shop or saw a tech office, the pain of what he had lost came rushing back. For a while, Charlie floated through his days in a haze. His only goal was survival, getting enough change to buy a meal or a coffee, finding a place to sleep where he wouldn't be disturbed. Sometimes, he would catch glimpses of people who looked like they had everything together, people walking by, rushing to their meetings, enjoying a carefree life. He felt like an outsider, an invisible man, just another face in the crowd. That was how it had been for so long. Until today. Charlie shook his head, trying to clear the overwhelming thoughts that threatened to flood him. How had he gotten here? How had his life come to this point? He stared down at his sign, still propped up against the bench, the words barely visible in the cold light. He hadn't expected anything when he had held it up this morning, just a simple request, $1 for coffee. But now, it felt like the world was asking him to decide whether he was ready to turn his life around. Could he really do it? Could he take Elon Musk's offer seriously? It was hard to believe. He was so used to the idea of rejection, of failure. He had spent so long convincing himself that he was beyond redemption, that nothing could fix what he had broken. But Musk's words kept echoing in his head, "You need a second chance." Charlie closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He had nothing left to lose. He had been living in the dark for so long, maybe it was time to step into the light. But how? He had no idea where to start. He had no skills left, no connections, no hope. Except for what Musk had offered him. Charlie's heart raced at the thought. A second chance. He couldn't remember the last time he had heard those words, let alone believed them. And yet, here he was, standing at the crossroads of his life. He had been so consumed by his failures, his regrets, that he never allowed himself the possibility of change. But today, something felt different. Today, he was being given an opportunity. Musk had seen something in him, a potential that Charlie hadn't recognized in himself for years. The question was, did Charlie still believe in that potential? Or had he let it die with all the other things he had lost? For the first time in a long while, Charlie felt a flicker of hope. The cold wind continued to blow through the streets, the kind of gust that made you want to pull your collar tighter and hunch your shoulders against the chill. Charlie's fingers were stiff from the cold, and his stomach rumbled, reminding him of the hunger that was always there, gnawing at him. But his thoughts were far from the physical discomfort. His mind was consumed by the brief encounter with Elon Musk. Charlie sat back down on the curb, his legs aching from standing for so long. The world felt like it was moving too fast for him to keep up. People walked by, their faces a blur as they rushed through their busy lives, oblivious to the man sitting in the shadows. But Charlie wasn't thinking about them anymore. He was thinking about Musk. The man who had stopped and talked to him like he wasn't invisible. Like he was someone worth helping. But now that the encounter was over, Charlie couldn't shake the rising doubts that clouded his mind. Could he really take Musk's offer seriously? What was it really all about? Was this some kind of publicity stunt? Or maybe Musk was just trying to feel good about himself for offering a homeless man a lifeline. It could all be some kind of game. Charlie had been let down too many times in the past. There had been people who promised to help him, rehabilitation programs, therapists, social workers, but in the end, they had all disappeared or given up on him when things got tough. He had learned to expect nothing. He had learned to keep his hopes low, so the inevitable disappointment didn't hurt as much. So, why should Musk be any different? Charlie took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He could feel the skepticism creeping in. The last thing he wanted was to get his hopes up again, only to be crushed. He had seen the way the world worked, and he knew better than to believe in fairy tales. There were no happy endings for people like him. He had seen the way society treated people who had nothing. They were ignored, forgotten, cast aside. But Musk was different. He wasn't just a random passerby. He was a billionaire, a visionary, a man who had changed the world. Could someone like that really see something in Charlie? Was it possible that he had the power to change Charlie's life, or was it just another empty gesture? Charlie ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. He wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The weight of his failures pressed down on him like an anchor, and the thought of trying again, of taking a step towards something better, felt overwhelming. He had tried before, hadn't he? He had tried to get clean, tried to get a job, tried to reconnect with his family, but nothing had ever stuck. It all felt like a long, losing battle. Maybe he was just destined to be this way, to be invisible, forgotten, broken. But then there was that moment, the brief exchange with Musk. You need a second chance. Those words reverberated in Charlie's mind. Was it really possible? Could he rebuild his life? Could he ever get back to the man he once was, the man with ambition and dreams? Or had those dreams died long ago, buried under years of regret and addiction? As he sat there, wrestling with his thoughts, Charlie noticed a familiar face walking by, a young woman with a coffee cup in hand. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, the kind of person who seemed to have it all together. She glanced down at him for a brief moment, then looked away, as though she hadn't even seen him. It was the usual reaction, indifference, or worse, pity. Charlie couldn't decide which stung more. He watched her walk away, and a bitter feeling rose in his chest. People like me don't matter, he thought, a familiar mantra that had served as his shield for so long. It was easier to believe that than to acknowledge the truth, that people did care. Some people cared. And for some strange reason, Elon Musk, a man who had everything, had seen him, really seen him. It wasn't just a passing glance, the way most people looked at the homeless. Musk had actually stopped. He had spoken to him like a human being. Charlie felt a flicker of something deep inside, a small ember of hope, barely visible but there. He couldn't ignore it. But was he strong enough to fan that ember into something more? He ran through the possibilities. If he took Musk's offer, what would it mean? Was he ready for that kind of change? Would he be able to fight his addiction, fight the voices in his head that told him he wasn't worthy of success, of a fresh start? The idea of starting over, of trying again, was terrifying. It meant confronting everything he had failed at, facing the people he had hurt, facing the things he had lost, and above all, facing himself. It meant taking the risk of failing again. Charlie's stomach churned as the weight of that thought settled on him. The fear of failure was one of the hardest things to overcome. But there was something else, too. Something that felt almost like a call to action. Maybe it was the idea of a second chance, of being offered something he hadn't dared to dream of in years. A way out. A chance to rebuild. The wind howled, snapping him back to reality. He glanced down at the cardboard sign by his feet again. "Can you spare $1 for coffee?" But this time, the sign felt different. It wasn't just about $1 anymore. It was about something bigger. Something that could change his entire life. His phone, tucked away in his coat pocket, buzzed. Charlie fumbled for it, his hands numb from the cold. It was a message from an old acquaintance, someone from his past who he hadn't heard from in years. "Charlie, we're doing a group meeting next week at the shelter. I think it could help. Let me know if you're interested." Charlie stared at the screen, his heart beating faster. Was this another sign? Another chance? He had nothing to lose by going. Nothing but his own fear. He took a deep breath, staring out into the busy city street. The noise of the world around him felt distant now. His mind was clearer than it had been in ages. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid of the unknown. Maybe it was time to take the first step. And maybe, just maybe, Elon Musk wasn't the only one offering a second chance. Charlie sat there for a while longer, staring at the glowing screen of his phone. The message from his old acquaintance had left him feeling conflicted. On one hand, he knew he should ignore it, he had been down this road before. There had been countless meetings, promises of help, and programs that were supposed to fix him, but they had all fallen short. But on the other hand, something felt different this time. Something in him wanted to believe. After a long pause, Charlie tapped out a quick reply, "I'll be there." It wasn't much, but it was enough. For the first time in a long while, he felt the faintest glimmer of hope. He hadn't made any promises to himself about his future, but at least he wasn't shutting the door entirely. The streets of San Francisco seemed to buzz louder around him as he stood up, folding his cardboard sign with automatic motions. There was a heaviness in the air, as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for him to make his next move. The people around him continued to rush by, eyes fixed forward, unaware of the internal battle he had just faced. Charlie shoved his hands deep into his coat pockets and began walking. The decision to attend the meeting felt like a tiny step, barely noticeable in the grand scheme of things. Yet it was a step. And that was something he hadn't done in a long time. The shelter wasn't far from where he was, just a few blocks away. As Charlie walked, he thought about the time when he had first fallen into this cycle of homelessness. He had been so proud of his success once, of his career, his independence, the future he had seen stretching out before him. But somewhere along the way, he had made choices that led him here. The worst part, he thought, was not the failure itself, it was the shame of it. That suffocating, crippling feeling of letting everyone down. Especially his parents. Charlie had been raised with strong values: work hard, stay focused, never give up. But he hadn't lived up to those ideals. He had thrown everything away, piece by piece, until he was left with nothing. And now, here he was, walking to a shelter, responding to a message from someone he barely knew, with nothing but uncertainty ahead. He reached the shelter just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city streets. The building was worn and old, but there was a warm light glowing from the windows. It looked inviting, and yet, there was something intimidating about it. The idea of walking through that door, of admitting that he needed help, felt like another failure. But he had made the commitment, he had already told the person he would come. As he pushed open the heavy door, the sounds of quiet conversation and soft murmurs filled the air. The room was full of people, many of them familiar faces from the streets. Some looked as if they had found a sense of peace, while others wore the same weary, guarded expressions Charlie had seen in his own reflection for years. He swallowed hard, feeling the familiar pang of self-consciousness. A man at the front of the room stood up and smiled warmly when he saw Charlie. "Hey, glad you could make it," the man said, his voice friendly but with a firmness that suggested he wasn't easily deterred. "I'm Tom. We're just getting started. Have a seat anywhere." Charlie nodded and found a seat in the back. He tried to blend in, but it was impossible. Every time someone looked in his direction, he felt like he was on display. Still, he remained seated, his body tense, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what he was expecting from this meeting, but it certainly wasn't comfort. He had come here to check off a box, not to find the answers to all his problems. But as the group began to speak, something inside him stirred. Tom spoke first. "We're all here for different reasons, but we have one thing in common: we've all been through a lot, and we're ready for a change." His voice was calm and reassuring, and Charlie found himself listening intently. "We can't do it alone. We can't make it through the tough times without support. And that's why we're here. To help each other, to build each other up, and to hold each other accountable." The words were simple, but they struck a chord. Charlie had been so used to doing everything on his own, fighting his demons alone, suffering in silence, keeping his distance from people who might try to help. But the idea of support, of not having to carry this weight alone, sounded both foreign and comforting at the same time. One by one, people in the group began to share their stories. A woman named Sarah spoke about her struggles with addiction, her years in and out of rehab, and her journey towards sobriety. A man named Robert talked about the years he spent drifting from city to city, never able to settle down, until he found a program that gave him a sense of direction. As Charlie listened to their stories, he felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a touch of envy. They had been through hell and come out the other side. Could he do the same? When it was Charlie's turn, he hesitated. He hadn't spoken about his past in years. Not to anyone. He had always kept his story locked inside, afraid of what people would think if they knew the real reasons he was where he was. But something about the group's openness, the vulnerability in the room, made him feel like he could share. For once, he didn't feel like a failure. He just felt like someone who needed help. Someone who needed a fresh start. Charlie took a deep breath and began, his voice shaking slightly at first. I don't know what to say," he started, "but I guess I've been through a lot. I used to have it all: career, friends, a life. But I messed it all up. Lost my job, my apartment, my friends. Everything. And now, here I am. I don't know how to start over. I'm not sure if I can." There was a long pause. Then, Tom smiled and nodded. "You're not alone, Charlie. We've all been there. The first step is always the hardest. But you're here. And that means something." Charlie felt a weight lift off his shoulders, just a little. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was completely alone. Maybe, just maybe, he could take this chance. He could rebuild. He could change. The days that followed the meeting were a blur for Charlie. It felt like he was caught in a strange, quiet storm, everything moving forward, yet he remained rooted in uncertainty. The faces of the people in the shelter began to blend together, each one with their own story, their own pain, their own hopes. He found himself feeling more connected than ever, but at the same time, more lost. He had taken that first step, but what now? As he continued to attend the meetings, there was an undeniable shift within him. It was subtle, but it was there. His confidence, though small, began to grow. He participated more in the discussions, and when people spoke about their struggles, he listened intently. For the first time, Charlie felt like he wasn't alone. And that meant something. But the question of whether he could truly rebuild, whether he was capable of changing, still lingered in the back of his mind. He had tried so many times before, only to fail. What was different this time? It was one afternoon, as Charlie sat in the shelter's small, dimly lit room, that something unexpected happened. He was scrolling through his phone, lost in thought, when his screen suddenly lit up with an incoming message. It was from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before tapping on it. "Hey, Charlie. This is Elon. I've been thinking about our conversation. I'd like to help you get started on your journey. Let's meet. I have an idea for you." Charlie's heart skipped a beat. It was a simple message, but its weight was enough to make his hands tremble. This couldn't be real. Could it? Elon Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur who had built a fortune from nothing, was reaching out to him. He reread the message again, still not quite believing it. But the reality of it slowly began to settle in. He had asked for just $1, but what he had gotten was something much bigger, a chance. A lifeline. His mind raced with possibilities, each one more surreal than the last. What did Musk mean by, "help you get started"? Charlie didn't know what to think. The world felt like it was shifting beneath his feet. For a brief moment, the doubts crept back in. Could he trust this? What did Musk want from him? Was this just some kind of publicity stunt? He took a deep breath and made up his mind. I'm going to meet him. There was no going back now. The opportunity to meet someone like Elon Musk, to speak to him directly, was something that didn't come around every day. Maybe it was a chance for Charlie to prove to himself that he could be something more than the broken man he saw in the mirror. The message had included a location, a cafe in Palo Alto, just an hour's drive away. Charlie wasn't sure what to expect. He had no idea what Musk might want to talk about. But there was one thing Charlie knew for certain: this was the moment that could change everything. He couldn't afford to let fear control him. Not now. That evening, after a long day at the shelter, Charlie stood at the edge of the bus stop. His heart was pounding as he adjusted the straps on his worn backpack. He felt strange, nervous, excited, terrified, all at once. A part of him wanted to turn around and head back to the shelter. It would be safer there, more familiar. But he knew he couldn't back down now. This was a real chance. One he had to take, no matter how uncertain the outcome. The bus ride was long, and Charlie stared out the window, trying to calm his nerves. He thought about the life he had left behind, the days when he felt in control, when he believed he had a future. He thought about his family, about the people he had disappointed, about the things he had lost. But most of all, he thought about the man who had stopped and spoken to him on the street, Elon Musk. He didn't know why Musk had offered to help, but Charlie couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the possibility of it all. When he finally arrived at the cafe, it was late in the evening. The place was quiet, with only a few patrons sitting at tables. He spotted Elon Musk immediately. There he was, sitting at a corner table, casually dressed in a dark jacket and jeans. There was something striking about him, not just because of who he was, but because of the way he seemed completely at ease in the moment. He wasn't surrounded by a team or security, just him, sitting alone, waiting. Charlie took a deep breath and walked toward the table, his steps slow but deliberate. As he approached, Musk looked up and smiled warmly, as though meeting him was the most natural thing in the world. "Charlie, it's good to see you again," Musk said, his voice calm and welcoming. "Please, have a seat." Charlie sat down, his mind racing. I didn't know what to expect, to be honest," he said, feeling a little sheepish. "I never thought I'd be sitting here with you." Musk chuckled softly. "Most people wouldn't expect it. But life has a funny way of surprising us." For a moment, there was an awkward silence. Charlie didn't know where to begin. He had so many questions, so many things he wanted to say. But Musk broke the silence first. "You asked me for $1, Charlie," Musk said, his tone thoughtful. But what if I told you that you didn't need just $1? What if I told you that you could have more than that, more than you ever thought possible? Charlie blinked, confused. More than $1. He wasn't sure if he was understanding correctly. This wasn't just about charity, was it? Musk leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but kind. I've been thinking about how you've been living, and I believe you have potential. I don't think $1 will fix anything, Charlie. What you need is a chance. A real chance. I'm willing to offer that. Let's start by getting you into a rehabilitation program, and we can go from there. Charlie's heart skipped a beat. The words hit him like a thunderbolt. Musk was offering him a way out, an opportunity to turn his life around. It wasn't just about money, it was about a second chance. A real, tangible chance. Charlie could hardly breathe. His mind raced as the weight of the moment hit him. Could this really be happening? Was this his moment to change everything? For the first time in years, Charlie felt the terrifying weight of hope. But along with that hope came a question that had always held him back: could he do it? Could he really turn his life around? Charlie sat there in stunned silence, the weight of Elon Musk's offer sinking in. The cafe around them, dimly lit and quiet, felt like a distant world compared to the storm swirling inside him. The words, "a real chance," echoed in his mind, and for a brief moment, he almost couldn't breathe. Could he really do this? Could he really change everything? Musk's eyes never wavered. He had a kind, unflinching gaze that made Charlie feel like he wasn't being judged, like he wasn't some lost cause. I know it's a lot to take in, Musk continued, his voice low and measured. But I believe people are capable of more than they think. You don't need to have it all figured out right now. It's a process. It's about taking small steps. Charlie ran his fingers through his hair, trying to focus. The prospect of a real chance, someone like Elon Musk, someone who had changed the world, offering to help him rebuild his life seemed almost impossible. It was overwhelming. A part of him wanted to ask, why me? But the words felt stuck in his throat. He wasn't sure how to voice the mix of awe and disbelief that had taken over him. Why? Charlie finally managed to ask, his voice coming out hoarse. Why are you doing this for me? Musk smiled softly. Because I've seen how people can change when they have the right kind of support. I didn't get here on my own, Charlie. I've had mentors, people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Maybe I'm not the person who can fix everything for you, but I can give you the tools. I can help you get started. Charlie looked down at the table, his mind racing. There had been so many times in his life when people had let him down, when he had believed in promises only to watch them crumble. But this felt different. There was no hidden agenda in Musk's eyes, no judgment in his tone. It was an offer, pure and simple, an opportunity to begin again. I've messed up so many times, Charlie said quietly, almost to himself. I've let people down, ruined my life. I don't even know if I deserve a chance. Musk leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. I'm not offering this because you deserve it, Charlie. I'm offering it because I believe you can deserve it. Everyone has their own battles. But no one has to fight them alone. Charlie felt the lump in his throat tighten. He wasn't sure why, but Musk's words struck him deeply. He had spent so long feeling isolated, carrying the weight of his failures on his own, and the idea that someone, especially someone like Elon Musk, saw something in him, saw potential, was almost too much to process. I don't know if I can do it, Charlie whispered, the words coming out in a rush. I don't even know where to start. Musk's smile was gentle, understanding. Start by trusting yourself. And trust the people around you. This journey isn't just about your success, it's about your growth. And that means allowing yourself to fail sometimes. But it also means not giving up. Charlie sat back in his chair, letting the words sink in. Trust. Growth. Failure. It wasn't just about fixing everything at once. It was about building himself back up, piece by piece. He had spent so long running from his past, hiding from his mistakes, but Musk was showing him that the path to recovery wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. A quiet moment passed between them, the hum of the cafe a distant background to the weight of their conversation. Musk seemed to be giving him space, waiting for him to process, and for the first time in a long while, Charlie felt like he didn't have to rush. "What do I do next?" Charlie asked, his voice more composed now, though still laced with uncertainty. Musk pulled out his phone, tapping on the screen for a moment before he slid it across the table. "I've already set up an appointment for you. There's a rehabilitation center in San Francisco, a good one. It's not easy, but I'm confident you'll find the structure and support you need. I've also reached out to a few of my colleagues. They might be able to offer some job training, even internships down the line. You've got a lot to offer, Charlie. But first, you need to rebuild yourself." Charlie's heart skipped again, but this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't fear, it was the hope he had been so afraid of feeling. Could he really do it? Looking down at the phone, Charlie saw the details of the rehab program, the contact numbers, and the encouragement Musk had written in the message. "This is your chance to get back on track. Trust the process." I don't know how to thank you," Charlie said, his voice thick with emotion. Musk shrugged, his face still serene. "You don't need to. Just take the chance, Charlie. Make it count." The silence that followed was heavy, but in a way that felt reassuring, like the calm before a storm. A good storm, one that might bring change. Charlie's mind was still racing, the weight of the next steps feeling both paralyzing and empowering. How would he do it? Could he follow through? Could he, for once, trust that this time, things could be different? He glanced at Elon, who was already looking at him with quiet expectation, as if waiting for him to make the decision. "I'll do it," Charlie said, his voice steady. "I'll take the first step. I'll try." Musk nodded, a small, approving smile on his face. That's all anyone can ask for. One step at a time. Charlie left the cafe that night with a sense of disbelief still clinging to him. His legs felt weak, but there was something in the air, something like possibility, that made him want to stand taller. This was the beginning, he realized. It wasn't a perfect start, but it was a start. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't walking alone. As he walked down the quiet street, heading back to the bus stop, Charlie couldn't help but think about the road ahead. There were no guarantees, no promises. But there was hope, and for now, that was enough. The following days passed in a whirlwind of emotions for Charlie. There was the excitement, of course, mixed with a healthy dose of fear. He had agreed to take the first step, but now he was faced with the reality of it. Could he actually go through with it? Could he really change his life? He spent the next few nights at the shelter, trying to prepare himself mentally for what was ahead. The rehab program Musk had recommended was the first thing on his mind. He had never been to anything like it before. Would he be able to handle it? The thought of facing his past demons, of confronting the very issues that had led him to the streets, made him feel sick to his stomach. But deep down, he knew he couldn't go back. He couldn't stay in the same place any longer. He thought about the conversation with Musk, about the man who had reached out to him when he had nothing to offer but $1. There was something about that meeting, something about Musk's belief in him, that kept him going. For the first time in years, someone believed that he could do more than just survive, he could actually thrive. But it wasn't going to be easy. Charlie knew that. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges. He had to make sacrifices, face uncomfortable truths about himself, and push through the parts of him that wanted to give up. But one thing was clear, he wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, Charlie boarded the bus to San Francisco, his stomach tied in knots. The ride was long, but he barely noticed the passing scenery. His mind kept replaying his conversation with Musk, the words, "Trust the process," echoing in his ears. As the bus pulled into the city, Charlie took a deep breath and stepped off, feeling the cool air against his face. San Francisco was different. There was a buzz here, a sense of movement. People were everywhere, hustling to get to their next destination. It felt like the world was alive, a world that had been out of his reach for so long. But now, he was stepping into it. The rehabilitation center Musk had recommended was located in the heart of the city, a sleek building that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic streets. Charlie stood outside for a moment, gathering his courage. His heart pounded in his chest. What if he didn't belong here? What if they saw through him and sent him packing? What if he wasn't good enough? With a deep breath, he pushed the doubts aside and walked through the doors. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, with soft lighting and soothing music playing in the background. The receptionist, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes, greeted him warmly. "You must be Charlie," she said with a smile. "Welcome. We're so glad you're here. If you'd like to have a seat, someone will be with you shortly." Charlie nodded, his mouth dry. He took a seat in the waiting area, feeling the weight of the moment. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure how he was supposed to feel. Was he nervous? Excited? Scared? All of the above, probably. It wasn't long before a man in his 40s, wearing a well-fitted blazer and glasses, approached him. He extended his hand. "Charlie, it's great to meet you. I'm Alex. I'll be working with you through the program." His handshake was firm, but not intimidating. Charlie shook his hand, his nerves still visible. "Thanks for having me." Alex smiled. "It's our pleasure. Let me show you around the center, and we can talk about what to expect." As Alex gave him a tour of the facility, Charlie couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The center was well organized, with a variety of programs aimed at helping people not just overcome their addiction or past mistakes, but truly rebuild their lives. There were rooms for therapy, group meetings, and even spaces where people could learn new skills that would help them find work, regain their confidence, and reintegrate into society. "This is a safe space," Alex explained as they walked through one of the group rooms. "We understand that recovery is more than just about quitting something, it's about understanding yourself, healing, and growing." Charlie nodded, absorbing the words. The more Alex spoke, the more he realized how much he needed this place. But there was still a part of him that was unsure. He had failed so many times before. He had tried to get clean, tried to change, but it had never stuck. What if it doesn't work this time? Alex must have sensed his hesitation because he stopped walking and turned to Charlie with a gentle expression. "I know it's scary," Alex said softly. "And it's okay to be afraid. But we're here to help you. The first step is to show up, to be willing to try. No one expects you to be perfect, Charlie. You're not alone here." Charlie swallowed hard, his emotions rising. "No one expects me to be perfect." It was a simple statement, but it meant the world to him. It was a message he hadn't heard in years, a message that said, "You are worthy of a second chance." After the tour, Alex gave him a schedule for the first week of the program. It was structured: therapy sessions, group activities, time for reflection, and workshops. It wasn't going to be easy, but Charlie knew it was the only way forward. "I'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m., Alex said as they shook hands once more. "You're going to do great." Charlie smiled, feeling the smallest flicker of hope ignite in his chest. Maybe this wasn't going to be as impossible as he had thought. As he left the center, he looked up at the sky, taking in the bustling city around him. For the first time in years, he felt like there was a place for him here. A real place. Not just a shelter to sleep in, but a chance to rebuild, to become someone new. The fear was still there, lingering in the back of his mind, but it was overshadowed by something more powerful: determination. This was it. The road ahead would be long, and there would be times when he wanted to give up, but Charlie knew one thing for sure: he wasn't giving up this time. Not now. Not ever again. Charlie woke up the next morning to the hum of the city outside his window. The sunlight was soft, just beginning to filter through the blinds, and for a fleeting moment, he almost felt like it was just any other day. But then it hit him: today was the day he would begin the rehab program. The day he would try to turn everything around. He stretched his arms above his head, the familiarity of the morning routine grounding him for a moment. But as he sat up, the weight of what he was about to do settled heavily on his chest. He had spent so many years running from his problems, convincing himself that it was easier to live in denial than face the mess he had made of his life. But now, there was no more running. He had promised himself that this time would be different. With a deep breath, Charlie pulled himself out of bed and made his way to the bathroom. His reflection in the mirror caught him off guard. He looked tired, worn, and the bags under his eyes told the story of too many sleepless nights. But there was something else there, something faint, but real. It was hope, just the smallest glimmer of it. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to shake off the nerves that had settled in his stomach. Today wasn't just about going through the motions, it was about change, about doing the hard work. And that terrified him. After a quick breakfast of oatmeal, he grabbed his bag and left the shelter, making his way toward the rehabilitation center. The morning was crisp, the streets alive with the energy of the city, but Charlie couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over him. What if this doesn't work? What if I can't do it? The questions gnawed at him, but he pushed them aside. One step at a time, he told himself. When he arrived at the center, he was greeted by Alex, who seemed as calm and composed as ever. "Good morning, Charlie," he said with a smile. "Ready to get started?" Charlie forced a smile back, but his insides were a mess. "I think so," he said, his voice unsure. Alex led him to a quiet room where the first group session would take place. There were about 8 other people in the room, all sitting in a circle. Some looked just as nervous as Charlie, while others seemed more at ease. But they all had one thing in common: they were all here for the same reason. They had made the decision to try, even if that decision came with a whole lot of fear and uncertainty. Charlie took a seat in the circle, feeling his heart race. The group leader, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, introduced herself as Sarah. She had a calm, nurturing presence that seemed to make everyone relax, even if just a little. "Welcome, everyone," Sarah began. "We're here today to begin a journey together. A journey of healing, of growth, and of self-discovery. No one expects perfection, and no one is here to judge. We're here to support each other." Charlie listened intently as Sarah spoke, her words resonating in a way that felt almost foreign to him. He had spent so long hiding his true feelings, pushing people away, convinced that he didn't deserve support. But now, he was being told that it was okay to lean on others, that it was okay to let his guard down. "We're going to start with introductions," Sarah said. "Tell us your name, where you're from, and what brought you here." The first person to speak was a young man named Jason, who shared that he had struggled with addiction for years. His voice trembled as he spoke, but there was a strength in his vulnerability that made Charlie pay attention. One by one, the others in the group shared their stories, stories of loss, betrayal, and regret. Some were tearful, others stoic, but all of them spoke with a raw honesty that made Charlie feel like he was finally in a place where he could be honest too. When it was his turn, he hesitated, his mouth dry, the words caught in his throat. "I'm Charlie," he finally said. "I've been living on the streets for a while now. I've made some bad choices. A lot of bad choices. And, I don't really know what brought me here. I guess I'm just tired of failing." The room fell silent for a moment. Charlie looked down at his hands, suddenly feeling exposed. But then he heard a voice, a woman named Rachel, speak softly, "You're not alone, Charlie. We've all been there." That simple statement, spoken with so much compassion, brought a lump to Charlie's throat. He looked up and met Rachel's eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel judged. He didn't feel like a failure. He just felt human. The rest of the session went by in a blur. Sarah guided the group through a series of discussions and exercises designed to help everyone begin to process their emotions and take responsibility for their actions. Charlie found himself struggling at times, especially when it came to facing his past. But he also felt something that he hadn't felt in years, the urge to keep going. The desire to try. As the session ended, Alex approached him. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his tone gentle but curious. Charlie took a moment to think. He wasn't sure how to put it into words, but he knew he had experienced something significant. It wasn't magic, it wasn't a miracle. But it was real. He felt seen. He felt heard. And that, in itself, was a huge step forward. I think it's going to be harder than I thought," Charlie said, his voice a little shaky. "But I want to keep going." Alex nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "That's the right attitude, Charlie. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Remember, one day at a time." As Charlie left the center that afternoon, he couldn't help but reflect on what had happened that day. He had shared his story, faced some of the hardest truths about himself, and for the first time in a long time, he hadn't run. It felt like a small victory. But a victory nonetheless. He knew the road ahead would be tough. There would be days when he wanted to quit, days when the weight of his past seemed too much to bear. But for now, he had made it through the first day. And that, he realized, was enough. Charlie woke up the next morning to the soft sound of birds chirping outside the window, but the weight in his chest was already pressing him awake. It was a feeling he had grown all too familiar with over the years, an unease, a persistent nagging, like something was always just out of reach. He tossed the blanket aside and sat up, staring at the floor, trying to gather himself. Yesterday's session had been a lot. Too much, maybe. For the first time in years, he had allowed himself to be vulnerable in front of strangers. He had opened up about things he had spent years burying, things he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. The pain he had been running from was still fresh, and the weight of it had only grown heavier now that it was out in the open. Charlie rubbed his temples, fighting the urge to climb back into bed and forget about it all. But he knew he couldn't do that. Not this time. He had promised himself he would make this work, even if it meant dealing with the things he had been avoiding for so long. He couldn't keep running from his past. Not when he had been given a chance like this. A chance to rebuild, to make things right. After a quick breakfast, Charlie made his way back to the rehabilitation center. The city seemed busier today, and there was a strange energy in the air. Maybe it was just his nerves, but it felt like the world was moving faster than he could keep up. He arrived at the center and was greeted by Alex, who was standing at the door, ready to guide him into the next phase of the program. "Morning, Charlie. How are you feeling?" Alex asked with his usual calm demeanor. Charlie hesitated, unsure how to answer. He felt a bit numb, as though he were walking through the motions, not quite sure if he was fully present. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot more to unpack than I thought." Alex nodded knowingly. "That's completely normal. You're just beginning to scratch the surface. Healing takes time, and sometimes it feels overwhelming. But you're here, and that's the most important thing." As they entered the center, Charlie saw a different group of people in the circle today. It was a mix of old faces from yesterday's group and a few new ones who had joined the program. There was an energy about them today that felt a little more serious, a little more focused. They were all here for the same reason, to confront their demons and take the first steps toward healing. The session began, and this time, Sarah led them through a series of exercises designed to help them face their personal fears. Charlie's heart raced as she spoke, but he did his best to stay focused. He wasn't sure he was ready for what came next. But he knew it was the only way forward. Today, we're going to dig deeper, Sarah explained. We're going to take a closer look at the things that have held us back. The things we've been running from. Charlie's stomach tightened. He had no idea what to expect, but he already knew that this session was going to be harder than the last. Sarah continued, I want you to think about a time in your life that you feel defines who you are now. A moment, or an experience, that changed everything for you. It could be a turning point, a loss, a betrayal, anything that has had a significant impact on your life. Charlie closed his eyes, trying to block out the noise in his head. The memories began to flood his mind, faster than he could process them. The streets. The pain. The broken relationships. But there was one memory that stood out more than the others, a single night, a single choice that had set him on the path he was now walking. It was years ago, before the drugs had fully taken over, before he had become homeless. Charlie had been a promising young man, just out of high school, with big dreams of making something of himself. He had a family that loved him, friends who believed in him. He had a future. But in one moment, one night, everything changed. It was his birthday. He had been drinking with friends, and they had encouraged him to take just one hit of something they said would make him feel better, would help him let loose. It was just one hit, they said. One hit couldn't hurt. But it did. And after that night, things spiraled quickly. One bad decision led to another, and soon, he found himself addicted. It wasn't long before he lost his job, his friends, and ultimately, his family. The people who loved him were gone. The man he had been, ambitious, hopeful, was lost. Charlie's hands clenched into fists as he fought back the flood of emotions. He wasn't ready to go there again. He wasn't ready to confront the guilt, the shame, the regret. But as he sat in the circle, Sarah's voice gently guided him back to the present. You don't have to share your story with anyone if you're not ready, she said softly. But I want you to sit with that memory for a moment. Let it come up, and acknowledge it. This is your chance to face it head on. Charlie's heart was pounding, but he didn't look away from the memory. He didn't want to hide anymore. He had hidden for too long. The room was quiet as Charlie sat with his thoughts. He felt raw, exposed, but it was the beginning of something. The beginning of forgiveness, of letting go. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the first step. He had made that choice, that first terrible choice, but that didn't mean he couldn't make a different one now. He could change. He could do better. When the session ended, Charlie felt emotionally drained, but there was a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, he had faced the worst parts of himself. And instead of running, he had chosen to stay. That was something he had never done before. As he walked out of the center, Alex caught up with him. How do you feel? He asked, his voice calm but attentive. Charlie took a deep breath. Like I've just been through a battle, but like I've won a little bit of it. I'm not sure how to explain it. Alex smiled. That's a good way to put it. It's not an easy journey, but every step forward counts. You're doing the right thing, Charlie. Charlie nodded. The weight in his chest hadn't gone away, but it didn't feel quite as heavy as before. He was taking it one step at a time. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. Charlie woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing on the table beside his bed. It was still early, and the light outside was just beginning to pierce through the blinds, casting long shadows on the floor. The reminder on his phone made him groan inwardly. Rehab. Another day to face his demons. Another day to fight against his own mind, which was always telling him to quit. To give up. But this time, he didn't listen. He dragged himself out of bed, staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror as he washed his face. The tired eyes staring back at him hadn't changed much over the past few weeks, but there was something different now, something deeper. There was a faint resolve in his eyes. He wasn't the same man who had wandered the streets, aimless and lost. That version of himself seemed distant, like someone else's story, someone else's pain. He was becoming more and more aware of that change every day. But the fear was still there. Fear of failing, of not being good enough, of falling back into the same old habits. The temptation to give in, to walk away from all of this, was never far from his mind. The weight of his past pressed on him, reminding him that it was easier to run than to face the reality of his mistakes. Charlie shook his head, trying to focus. "You've come too far to turn back now." He grabbed his jacket and left the room, heading to the rehab center for the day's session. When he arrived, he felt a tight knot in his stomach. He had been doing well, or so he thought, but the challenges ahead felt insurmountable. The group sessions had been intense. The exercises were pushing him to confront things he had avoided for years. But something about today felt different, more difficult, more personal. Charlie entered the center and was immediately greeted by Sarah, who gave him a warm but understanding smile. "Hey, Charlie. How are you holding up?" Charlie hesitated. "It's been tough. Some days are harder than others. I don't know how much longer I can keep pushing through this." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's completely okay. It's normal to feel like this. But you're here, and that's what matters. You're showing up. That's already a huge victory." Charlie nodded, but his mind was racing. He wasn't sure he was as strong as Sarah thought he was. He wasn't sure he could keep doing this, keep facing the pain. The pressure of his own mind was beginning to feel too heavy to bear. "Why don't you take a seat?" Sarah suggested, leading him into the therapy room. The group was already there, waiting. There were some new faces today, people who had only recently joined the program, others who had been there as long as Charlie. Everyone was looking at him expectantly, but Charlie couldn't focus on them. His thoughts were spiraling. The session began, and Sarah introduced a new exercise. They were going to talk about their biggest fears. Not just the things that scared them on the surface, but the deep, hidden fears, the ones they tried to ignore or push away. The fears that controlled them. Charlie's heart began to race. He didn't know if he was ready for this. His biggest fear. Losing control. Losing himself to his past, to the addiction, to the self-doubt that had been with him for so long. It was a fear he had kept buried, never daring to let anyone see it. But here he was, being asked to expose it in front of a room full of strangers. "Let's start with you, Charlie," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. Charlie's throat tightened. He felt like a lump was forming, blocking his air. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He wanted to hide. He wanted to disappear. The silence in the room felt like a weight pressing down on him. "Charlie, it's okay," Sarah said, sensing his hesitation. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready. But just know, you're not alone. We're here to support you." For a long moment, Charlie just stared at the floor, his heart pounding in his chest. The fear was suffocating. He wanted to shout, to say anything to make it stop, but the words were trapped inside him. Then, something inside him shifted. He couldn't explain it. It was like a dam breaking, a crack in the wall he had built for years. He took a deep breath and finally spoke. "I'm scared I'm not strong enough to change. That no matter how hard I try, I'll always be the person I was before. The guy who ruined everything. I'm scared that I'll always be a failure." The words came out in a rush, and for a brief moment, it felt like the room had fallen away, leaving only Charlie and his confession. He had said it out loud. The thing he had feared the most. The thing he had hidden deep inside. A few people in the group nodded understandingly. Rachel, the woman from yesterday's session, spoke up. "I know how you feel, Charlie. I've been there. The fear of never being enough. But that's not who you are. You're here now. You're fighting for yourself. That takes more strength than you realize. Charlie looked around the room, seeing the same vulnerability in others' eyes. They were all fighting their own battles, each person struggling with their own demons. And in that moment, Charlie felt a strange sense of connection. He wasn't alone. He wasn't the only one who had ever felt broken, lost, and afraid. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice trembling. "I don't feel so alone now." As the session continued, Charlie found himself opening up more. It wasn't easy, but the weight in his chest seemed a little lighter with each word he spoke. He was letting go of the secrets he had been carrying for so long. The things that had defined him, that had kept him in chains, were losing their power over him. By the end of the session, Charlie felt emotionally drained but somehow relieved. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it didn't feel as overwhelming as before. He was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could change. As he left the center, Alex approached him, his expression thoughtful. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Charlie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day still pressing down on him but also something else, something new. "Better," he said. "I'm starting to see that I don't have to do this alone. And maybe I'm stronger than I thought." Alex smiled. "You are. And you'll keep getting stronger. One step at a time." Charlie nodded, walking out into the world with a little more hope than when he had walked in. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he might just be able to face it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The weeks that followed were a blur of emotions, small victories, and moments of doubt. Every morning, Charlie woke up with the familiar weight in his chest, the fear of not being enough, the lingering anxiety that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't cut out for this journey after all. But each time, he pushed through it. He got out of bed. He got dressed. He showed up. And slowly, he began to change. The rehab center had become a second home. It was no longer just a place to confront his demons, it was a place where he was learning to understand himself, to piece together the broken parts that he had spent years running from. His group sessions had turned into something more than just exercises. They had become a space where he felt seen and heard, a community of people who shared his struggles, his pain, and his dreams of a better life. One particular day stood out in his memory. It was a Friday afternoon, and the sun was shining brightly through the large windows of the therapy room. Charlie had just finished another group discussion, one focused on setting personal goals and how to stay motivated despite setbacks. "You've all made incredible progress," Sarah said, her tone encouraging. "But remember, the real work doesn't happen just here. It happens in your day-to-day life, when you're out there, facing the world and everything it throws at you." Charlie felt a flicker of something inside him, a spark that he hadn't felt in a long time. For months, he had been relying on the rehab center as a crutch, a place of refuge. But Sarah's words hit him in a way he hadn't anticipated. It was true. He couldn't stay in the bubble forever. At some point, he would have to face the world on his own. And it terrified him. But then he remembered something Sarah had said a few weeks ago, during one of their hardest sessions: "You don't have to do this alone." He had felt the weight of those words then, but now, they carried even more meaning. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. Not with the friends he had made in this group. Not with the support of people who understood his journey. "You'll face challenges, of course," Sarah continued. "But that's when you'll really find out what you're made of. And when things feel tough, that's when you lean on the people who've got your back." Charlie's thoughts drifted to his past. The friends he had lost. The people he had pushed away. For so long, he had believed he was on his own, that no one cared, that he had burned every bridge. But the truth was, he wasn't alone anymore. And that was the first step toward healing. After the session ended, Charlie decided to go for a walk. The weather was perfect, and the streets were bustling with people going about their day. As he walked, his mind wandered back to his past, the streets he had once wandered, the cold nights spent searching for something that would numb the pain. But today, everything felt different. The world seemed a little more open, a little more welcoming. As he walked down the familiar streets, Charlie noticed a man sitting on the corner, holding a sign. It wasn't the first time he had seen someone in need, but today, something shifted inside him. He stopped for a moment, looking at the man who seemed so much like he had once been, a lost soul, struggling to survive. He felt a pang of sympathy for the man, but also something more, an understanding. He knew the pain that man felt, the weight of not knowing how to escape it. And for the first time, Charlie didn't just pass by. He walked up to the man and knelt down. The man looked up at him, surprised by the gesture. "Hey," Charlie said softly. "I know it's hard. But you don't have to do this alone." The man blinked, clearly taken aback by the kindness. "What's that supposed to mean?" Charlie smiled gently. "I've been where you are. But there's hope. There are places out there where people want to help. You just have to take that first step." The man's eyes narrowed, as if he didn't quite believe Charlie. But Charlie didn't back down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few dollars, handing them to the man. "Take this. And think about what I said. There's a way out. I promise." The man hesitated for a moment, then took the money, his expression softening slightly. "Thanks. I don't know if I can believe that, but I appreciate it." Charlie stood up, feeling a strange sense of pride. He had done something small, but it had felt significant. For the first time, he wasn't just looking out for himself. He was reaching out, offering someone else the hope that he had found. As he walked away, Charlie couldn't help but think of how far he had come. He wasn't fixed. He wasn't perfect. But he was getting there. And for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He had started the journey not just for himself, but for others too. He had started to understand that the true measure of his healing wasn't just about how much he could overcome, but how much he could give back to those still struggling. By the time he returned to the center, Charlie felt a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid to face it. That night, he sat in his room, reflecting on the events of the day. He thought about the people he had met, the lessons he had learned, and the person he was becoming. He was no longer the man who wandered the streets with nothing but his addiction to keep him company. He was someone different now, someone with hope, with purpose, with a chance to rebuild. The fear still lingered, of course. But it wasn't as loud as it used to be. It didn't control him anymore. The voice that had once told him he wasn't good enough had quieted, replaced by a new voice, one that told him he was worthy of this second chance. Charlie closed his eyes, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over him. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to walk it. The early morning sunlight poured in through the small window of Charlie's room, bathing the space in a warm, golden glow. He had been up for over an hour, sipping his coffee and staring out at the city below. There was a calmness to the morning that he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't sure if it was the effect of his therapy or simply the fact that he was beginning to find a sense of normalcy in his life, but he felt something he had missed for years: hope. For the first time in ages, he didn't feel the heavy weight of regret on his shoulders. He wasn't obsessing over his past mistakes or wondering if the future would be just as disappointing as everything that had come before. He had let go of the bitterness, or at least, he was learning to. His phone buzzed on the small table beside him, interrupting his thoughts. Charlie glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number flashing. Normally, he would have ignored it, assuming it was some kind of telemarketer, but something in his gut told him to answer. "Hello?" he said cautiously. "Hey, Charlie." "It's Alex," came the cheerful voice on the other end. Charlie's stomach did a quick flip. Alex was a guy from the rehab center who had been one of his first real friends in this whole process. The guy had always been upbeat, even when things were tough, and he had quickly become one of Charlie's biggest supporters. They had shared many late-night talks about life, addiction, and everything in between. "Alex. What's up?" Charlie replied, a grin tugging at his lips. "I've got something huge I want to tell you. It's kind of unexpected, but I think it could be life-changing for you," Alex said, excitement in his voice. Charlie's curiosity piqued. "What's going on? What's so life-changing?" There was a brief pause on the other end, like Alex was trying to gather his thoughts. "You remember that program I told you about, the one that helps people transition back into the workforce, right? Well, I think you're ready for it. I know you've been wanting to find a job, something that could give you purpose outside of here. This could be it." Charlie's heart skipped a beat. He had been thinking about getting back to work, but the fear of not being good enough, of being rejected again, held him back. The thought of stepping back into the world, into a job, made his stomach churn. Could he really do this? Could he really hold a job down after everything he had been through? Alex's voice broke through his swirling thoughts. "I've got a contact who's been helping people like us get into the workforce. They focus on individuals who are in recovery. They want people who are serious about turning their lives around, and honestly, I think you've shown more strength than anyone I know. You can do this, Charlie. I believe in you." Charlie leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The idea was terrifying, but in some small corner of his heart, he felt a flicker of excitement. Maybe Alex was right. Maybe this was the next step he needed to take. The thought of earning a paycheck, of feeling like he was contributing, felt like a foreign but appealing concept. Could he really start over again? "I don't know, man," Charlie muttered, feeling the familiar anxiety creeping in. "What if they don't accept me? What if I mess up?" "Charlie, look at everything you've already overcome," Alex said, his voice calm but firm. "You've been showing up for yourself every single day. You've made it this far. This is just another step. If you fall, you get back up. But you have to take the step first." Charlie swallowed hard. He had always believed that he was too broken, too far gone to fix. But something in Alex's voice gave him pause. Maybe it wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about trying. "Okay," Charlie said, a deep breath escaping his lungs. "Tell me what I need to do." Alex smiled on the other end of the line. "I'm going to send you the contact information. I'll follow up with them, and we'll get this moving. But I want you to remember one thing, you've got this. This is your chance. Don't let fear hold you back." Charlie's pulse quickened. This was real. This wasn't some dream or empty promise. It was his shot. "Thanks, Alex," Charlie said, feeling the weight of the moment sink in. "You've no idea how much this means." "Just promise me one thing," Alex said, a bit of playfulness in his tone. "When you make it big, you won't forget about the little people who helped you along the way." Charlie chuckled, the nervous tension in his shoulders easing a bit. "I won't forget. I promise." As he ended the call, Charlie sat in silence for a moment, letting the enormity of what had just been set into motion settle in. This wasn't going to be easy. He knew that. But maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what he needed to finally step out of the shadows of his past and into a new chapter of his life. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Charlie was given the information for the program Alex had mentioned, and after several nervous emails and phone calls, he was scheduled for an interview. Every step of the way, he had to fight the inner voice that told him to quit, to run, to hide from the possibility of failure. But every time that voice crept up, he reminded himself that he wasn't who he used to be. He wasn't the man lost in his addiction anymore. He was someone different now, someone stronger. Finally, the day of the interview arrived. Charlie stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his jacket for the umpteenth time. His palms were sweaty, his heart thudding in his chest. He felt a twinge of panic rising within him, but he forced himself to take a deep breath and focus. This was it. This was the moment he had been working toward. He had done the hard work to get here, now all he had to do was take the final step. As he walked out the door and into the world outside, Charlie couldn't help but feel that for the first time, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. And this time, he wasn't going to let anything hold him back. Charlie arrived at the building a little earlier than his scheduled interview time, which, to his surprise, gave him a moment of clarity. He stood outside the entrance, looking up at the tall, sleek glass building that seemed to stretch toward the sky. It felt like a world away from the streets he had once wandered, the nights spent on cold park benches, or the days when survival was his only priority. Now, here he was, dressed in a suit, a clean shave, and his shoes shining. A few months ago, Charlie never would have imagined himself in this situation. The thought of walking into a corporate office, sitting across from someone in a suit, and discussing his future was beyond comprehension. His entire existence had been a series of chaotic moments, full of confusion and self-doubt. But today, it felt like everything had come full circle. He shook his hands out nervously, taking deep breaths to steady his pulse. As he stepped through the revolving doors of the building, a sense of disbelief washed over him. This was real. He wasn't going to turn back now. The receptionist at the front desk greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "Hi, I'm Charlie. I have an interview scheduled for 10 a.m. with the Workforce Transition Program," he replied, his voice a little shakier than he had intended. "Ah, yes, Mr. Charlie. We've been expecting you. Please take a seat, they'll be with you shortly." Charlie nodded, taking a seat in the waiting area. The soft hum of conversation and the clicking of keyboards filled the space, but he felt strangely disconnected from it all. It was a world he wasn't sure he belonged to, but at the same time, he felt like he was finally making a place for himself in it. His mind wandered back to the countless times he had been told that he wouldn't amount to anything, that he would always be a statistic. But none of that mattered now. This was his chance to prove that the people who had doubted him had been wrong. His name was called a few moments later, and Charlie stood up, trying to force a sense of calm into his body. A woman in her early 40s, wearing a professional yet approachable outfit, greeted him warmly. "Charlie, it's so nice to meet you. I'm Rebecca, and I'll be conducting your interview today." They shook hands, and Rebecca led him into a small conference room. The room was modern but comfortable, with a large wooden table and soft, plush chairs that helped ease the tension in Charlie's shoulders. "Please, have a seat," Rebecca said as she sat down across from him. Charlie settled into the chair, the nervousness in his stomach making it feel as if he was sitting on pins and needles. But he kept reminding himself that he had come this far. This was just another hurdle to overcome. Rebecca smiled, her demeanor professional but kind. "Charlie, I've read your application, and I'm really impressed with how far you've come. We know that everyone's journey is different, and we're here to help you take that next step. Can you tell me a little bit about your background and what led you to this program?" Charlie took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "Well," he began, his voice steadying, "I've been through a lot in the past few years. I've had my share of struggles with addiction, and I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out who I am and what I want out of life. I came to this program because I want to rebuild. I've learned a lot about myself, and I know that I'm ready for the next step. I just need the opportunity." Rebecca nodded, her eyes softening as she listened. "It sounds like you've done some serious self-reflection, Charlie. That's the first step. And you're right, this program is all about providing people like you with the support and resources they need to get back on their feet. What kind of work are you interested in?" Charlie hesitated for a moment. The question felt both simple and overwhelming at the same time. The world of work seemed vast, and he had no idea where to begin. He had been so focused on his recovery that he hadn't thought much about his career aspirations. But now, sitting across from Rebecca, he realized that this was a moment to think big. To start imagining a future that he could be proud of. "I'm interested in working in something that involves helping others," Charlie said slowly, finding his voice. "I know what it's like to feel lost, and I want to be part of something that gives people the chance to rebuild, just like I am. I've been through a lot of struggles, and I want to use that to help others who are going through the same thing." Rebecca's face lit up, her expression genuine. "That's wonderful, Charlie. It's clear that you've gained a lot of insight through your experiences. The world needs more people who are willing to give back. We have several opportunities in nonprofit organizations and social services, where you could make a real impact. But before we dive into specifics, can you tell me about a time when you faced a significant challenge and how you overcame it?" Charlie's mind instantly went back to the time when he had hit rock bottom, the night he had been sitting on a bench, thinking that there was no way out. It was a painful memory, but it was also the turning point for him. "There was a time when I thought I was done," he began, his voice growing a little more quiet, as the memories flooded back. "I had no place to go, no one to turn to. I was lost in my addiction, and I didn't know how to climb out. But then, something clicked. I realized that if I didn't change, I wouldn't survive. I made the decision to get help, and from there, it wasn't easy, but I kept going. One day at a time. And I've learned that I can keep going, no matter how hard it gets. It's about taking those small steps forward." Rebecca sat in silence for a moment, clearly moved by Charlie's story. "That's incredible, Charlie. You've shown remarkable strength, and it's evident that you have a passion for making a difference. I think you'll be an asset to this program, and we'd love to help you find the right opportunity." Charlie felt a surge of emotion as he processed her words. After everything he had been through, the mistakes, the failures, the moments when he had wanted to give up, he was finally being seen. For the first time, he wasn't just a person defined by his past. He was someone with potential, with a future that was finally beginning to take shape. Rebecca smiled again, handing him a brochure. "Here's some information about the program and the types of roles we have available. We'll also schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss next steps. But I want you to know, Charlie, that you're not just another applicant. You've got what it takes to succeed." Charlie stood up, shaking her hand once more. "Thank you. I really appreciate this. I won't let you down." As he walked out of the building, the weight in his chest felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time, Charlie felt a sense of pride in what he had accomplished. He was no longer a man defined by his mistakes, he was someone who had overcome them. The road ahead was still uncertain, but today, for the first time, Charlie could see the path clearly. And he was ready to take that next step. The next few days felt like a blur for Charlie. The interview, although nerve-wracking, had gone better than he could have imagined. Rebecca had been warm and understanding, and it seemed like he had made a real connection with her. Now, he was waiting. The waiting was the hardest part, like being stuck in a moment of suspended animation, unsure of what would come next. He spent his days continuing his therapy sessions, attending group meetings, and working on rebuilding his life, piece by piece. The old habits were still there, lurking in the background, doubt, fear, hesitation, but Charlie was slowly learning to push them away. Every morning when he woke up, he reminded himself that this was his chance, his moment to prove to himself, and to the world, that he was more than just a man who had fallen. On the 5th day after the interview, as Charlie sat on the edge of his bed, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his heart skipped a beat. It was an unknown number. Could it be them? His breath caught in his throat. He had almost convinced himself that he would never hear back, that this was just another disappointment. But this call felt different. He answered the phone quickly, his voice a little more anxious than he intended. "Hello. Hi, is this Charlie? A friendly voice asked on the other end. Yes, this is Charlie, he responded, trying to steady his nerves. This is Rebecca from the Workforce Transition Program. I wanted to follow up with you after our interview. We've reviewed your application, and I'm happy to say that we would like to offer you a position with one of our partner organizations. Charlie's stomach did a flip. He stood up, pacing around his small room as he tried to process what she was saying. This was happening. It was real. Wait, really? He asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and excitement. You mean, I got the job? Yes, we believe you're ready to take on this next step. The role is with a non-profit organization focused on helping people in recovery, just like you. It's an entry-level position, but we're confident that you'll be able to grow within the organization. The team is supportive, and they understand where you're coming from. It's the perfect place for you to build your experience and continue your recovery. Charlie could hardly believe what he was hearing. It felt like a dream, something he had longed for but never expected. He had worked so hard to get here, and now, someone believed in him. This wasn't just an opportunity for work, it was a chance to give back, to help others, just as he had been helped. That's incredible, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I can't believe this is happening. We believe in you, Charlie, Rebecca said kindly. You've made a lot of progress, and this is your chance to continue moving forward. We'll send over the details about the role, and you'll be able to start next week. Charlie's heart was racing now, a smile spreading across his face. Thank you so much. I won't let you down. We're excited to see what you can do, Charlie. This is just the beginning. Congratulations, and we'll be in touch with next steps. As he hung up the phone, Charlie stood there for a few moments, frozen. The world outside his window seemed brighter, more vibrant, than it had in a long time. He had done it. He had made it through the dark times and into the light. And now, the real work was just beginning. But there was no fear this time, no anxiety that crippled him. This time, Charlie felt ready. Ready to face whatever came his way, and ready to build the future he had always dreamed of. Charlie's first day at the non-profit organization arrived quickly. He had spent the past few days preparing himself, picking out his clothes, reading up on the organization, and getting mentally ready for the new chapter in his life. The morning was calm, and as he walked out of his apartment and onto the street, he felt an unfamiliar sense of excitement bubbling inside him. It was like he was taking his first real step into the world again. He arrived early, taking a moment to collect his thoughts before entering the building. The lobby was sleek and modern, much like the corporate building where he had had his interview. But this place felt different, warmer, more inviting. As he walked up to the front desk, a friendly receptionist greeted him and directed him to a small meeting room. You'll be meeting with Jason, our program manager. He'll show you the ropes today, the receptionist said with a smile. Jason, a tall man in his 30s with short cropped hair and a welcoming smile, greeted Charlie when he entered the room. Hey, Charlie. Welcome. We're so excited to have you on board. Thanks, Jason, Charlie replied, shaking his hand. I'm really excited to be here. Jason led him through a quick tour of the building, introducing him to some of the staff and explaining the organization's mission. They were focused on helping individuals in recovery find work, housing, and the support they needed to rebuild their lives. It was the perfect place for Charlie, somewhere that aligned with his values and his desire to give back. Throughout the day, Jason showed Charlie the ins and outs of the program. There were support groups for clients, case management systems, and job placement programs. Charlie was assigned to shadow one of the case managers, who worked with individuals directly to help them secure employment. As the day came to a close, Charlie was filled with a sense of purpose. He hadn't just found a job, he had found something that truly mattered. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. This was his opportunity to make a difference in people's lives, to help others find the same hope that he had found. And, for the first time in a long while, Charlie felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. As he walked home that evening, he smiled to himself. He wasn't the same man who had once stood on a street corner, asking a stranger for $1. He was someone who had been given a chance, and he was going to make the most of it. The future, once so uncertain, was now wide open, and for the first time, he was excited to see where it would take him. The weeks that followed Charlie's first day at the nonprofit organization felt like a whirlwind of learning and growth. Every day, he felt a little more at ease, a little more confident in his new role. But the progress didn't come without its struggles. Despite his excitement, the old fears, the ones that had haunted him for so long, continued to lurk in the background, threatening to undermine the progress he had worked so hard to achieve. One of the biggest challenges Charlie faced was adjusting to the structure of a 9-to-5 job. For years, his life had been unpredictable. He had never known what it felt like to have a set routine, to be accountable for his time, or to be expected to show up and give his best every single day. But now, he was part of a team, and there was an unspoken expectation to contribute, to be present, and to keep pushing forward. The first few days were rough. Charlie would lie awake at night, his mind racing with self-doubt. What if I'm not good enough? What if they figure out that I don't belong here? What if I mess up? But every morning, he woke up and reminded himself that he was here for a reason. He had earned this opportunity, and he was capable of succeeding. He could feel the weight of his past trying to drag him back, but he knew he couldn't let it win. As the days turned into weeks, Charlie began to notice small changes. He was gaining confidence in his role, and his colleagues started to notice. They admired his dedication, his willingness to learn, and the compassion he brought to the table. His supervisor, Jason, took note of his hard work, offering feedback and praise when appropriate, which helped Charlie feel like he was on the right track. One afternoon, as Charlie sat at his desk, his phone buzzed with a notification. He picked it up and saw that it was a message from his sister, Emily. They hadn't spoken much lately, but he always kept her updated on his progress. She was a constant source of support, especially when things got tough. The message was short but sweet. "Hey Charlie, just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I'm proud of you, always." Charlie smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had always been close to Emily, but their relationship had been strained during his darkest days. She had been worried about him, watching from the sidelines as he spiraled out of control. But now, things were different. They were rebuilding their bond, one step at a time. He quickly typed a reply. "Thanks, Em. Things are going well. I'm really starting to feel like I belong here. It's been a big adjustment, but I'm taking it one day at a time. Hope all is good with you." As he sent the message, a sense of peace settled over him. Even though the road ahead was still long, he wasn't walking it alone. He had a support system, his sister, his colleagues, and the people who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. The next day, as Charlie was wrapping up for the day, Jason approached him with a smile. "Charlie, I've got a little more responsibility I'd like to give you. How do you feel about taking on a case of your own?" Charlie's heart skipped a beat. He had been shadowing a senior case manager for weeks now, learning the ropes, but the thought of taking on a case by himself was a big step. It was a responsibility he hadn't anticipated so soon. Jason seemed to sense the hesitation in Charlie's expression. "I know it's a lot, but I believe you're ready. You've been doing great, and I think you'll handle it just fine. You'll have support from the team, of course, but I think you're in a good position to help someone who's really struggling." Charlie took a deep breath, weighing the decision. He had come this far, hadn't he? He had faced down his demons, had shown up every day, and now, this was the next logical step in his journey. The fear was there, but it wasn't paralyzing him anymore. It was just another hurdle to jump over, another mountain to climb. "I'll do it," he said with a quiet but firm confidence. "I'm ready." Jason smiled, clearly pleased with his decision. Great. I'll get the details over to you by the end of the day. I'm really looking forward to seeing how you handle this. As Jason walked away, Charlie felt a mix of emotions. There was the excitement of taking on new responsibilities, but also a wave of anxiety. The pressure to succeed was real, and there was no escaping it. But he had learned one important lesson in the past few months: he could handle more than he thought he could. That evening, Charlie sat at his small desk in his apartment, the case file spread out in front of him. He read through the information about his new client, Mark, a man in his mid-30s who had been struggling with substance abuse for years and was now trying to rebuild his life after a recent stint in rehab. Mark's story was familiar to Charlie. He saw pieces of his own journey in Mark's struggles, the same desperation, the same hope for a second chance. Charlie took a deep breath and started drafting an action plan. He would meet with Mark the following week, and his job would be to help him find work, offer guidance, and provide the support he needed to stay on track. It was a big responsibility, and Charlie knew that. But he also knew that this was the work he had been meant to do all along. As the night stretched on, Charlie worked tirelessly to prepare. His mind wandered at times: was he doing enough? Was he making the right choices? But he pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the task at hand. He couldn't afford to let fear or self-doubt take over. He had to trust in the work he had already done and in the progress he had made. When he finally finished preparing for the meeting, Charlie leaned back in his chair and exhaled. There was still a long way to go, but he had taken another important step forward. He was no longer the man who had asked a stranger for $1 on the street. He was a man who was trying to make a difference, and that was enough. The next day, as he arrived at the office, Charlie could feel the familiar excitement bubbling inside him. His first solo case was about to begin, and he was ready for it. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for sure: he was not the same person he used to be. And that realization, more than anything else, gave him the strength to keep moving forward. Charlie's first solo case was a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. He had been preparing for weeks, studying everything about his client, Mark, and the steps he needed to take to help him. The thought of making a real difference in someone's life sent waves of hope through his chest. But the pressure of living up to the expectations, his own, and those of his colleagues, was something he couldn't ignore. Mark was supposed to come in for his first meeting with Charlie on a rainy Thursday morning. Charlie had spent the entire evening before reviewing Mark's case, jotting down notes, and mentally rehearsing what he was going to say. It felt surreal to be on the other side of the desk, the one offering help instead of seeking it. When Mark walked through the door, Charlie felt a sense of immediate recognition. Mark was a little older than him, maybe in his late 30s, but his eyes told the same story. The same pain, the same uncertainty that Charlie had once seen in his own reflection. "Hi, Mark," Charlie greeted, standing up and offering a firm handshake. "I'm Charlie. It's good to meet you." Mark hesitated for a moment, looking around the office as if he weren't sure whether he should be there or not. But after a few seconds, he met Charlie's eyes and gave a small, shy smile. "Hey, man. Thanks for meeting with me." Charlie motioned to the chair across from him. "Please, have a seat. I know it's a big step to come in, and I just want you to know you're not alone in this." Mark nodded and slowly lowered himself into the chair. He looked nervous, unsure of what to expect, and Charlie could relate more than he cared to admit. This was the beginning of a new chapter for Mark, just like it had been for Charlie, and it would take time, patience, and understanding. Charlie took a seat and opened the folder on his desk, making a show of reviewing Mark's case again, although he had already memorized most of the details. "So, Mark, from what I've read here, you've been through quite a bit, and now you're looking for a fresh start. Is that right?" Mark let out a shaky breath. "Yeah. I got out of rehab about 6 weeks ago. And things have been okay, but I'm struggling to find work. I don't know where to start, man. I've messed up a lot in my life, and I don't know if I can fix it." Charlie could hear the desperation in Mark's voice, and he knew exactly how it felt. He had once felt like there was no way out, like he would always be stuck in the same cycle. But here he was, on the other side, ready to help someone else who was where he had once been. "Look, Mark," Charlie said, leaning forward slightly. "I won't lie to you, recovery is hard. And finding stable work can be even harder. But it's possible. I know, because I've been there. And I'm here to help you every step of the way. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at your resume and start applying for jobs. We'll work together to make sure it highlights your strengths and shows potential employers the skills you have." Mark seemed to relax a little at Charlie's words, his shoulders loosening as he looked up at him. "You really think I can get a job?" he asked, almost as if he couldn't believe it. Charlie nodded. "I do. It won't be easy, but you've already taken the hardest step, Mark. You showed up. Now we take it one day at a time." They spent the next hour discussing Mark's background, his skills, and the types of jobs he would be interested in. Charlie could see the spark of hope starting to return in Mark's eyes, and it made him feel a sense of pride he hadn't expected. It wasn't just about helping Mark find a job, it was about showing him that he was worth the effort. He was worth fighting for. By the end of the meeting, Charlie had helped Mark draft a new resume and made a list of potential job leads. As they wrapped up, Charlie could see the relief in Mark's face, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Thanks, Charlie," Mark said, standing up. "I really appreciate this. I don't know if I would have gotten started on my own." Charlie smiled. "That's what I'm here for, man. You're not in this alone. We're going to get you back on your feet." As Mark left the office, Charlie couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. This was why he had chosen this path, to help people like Mark, to give them the support and encouragement they needed to get back on track. He had been given a second chance, and now, he was passing that gift forward. The next few weeks were a blur of hard work, not just for Charlie but for Mark as well. Mark was applying to jobs, attending interviews, and staying focused on his recovery. Charlie checked in with him regularly, offering guidance when necessary, and providing encouragement when the setbacks inevitably came. The real breakthrough came one Thursday afternoon when Mark called Charlie with some exciting news. "Charlie, man," Mark said over the phone, his voice bubbling with excitement. "I got a job. I start next week." Charlie's heart leaped. "That's amazing, Mark. I'm so proud of you. I knew you had it in you. I couldn't have done it without you, man. I really appreciate all the help. I feel like I'm actually starting over, you know. Like I have a real shot at this." Charlie smiled, his own sense of accomplishment swelling inside him. "You did all the hard work, Mark. You showed up, and you kept going, even when it got tough. That's what makes all the difference." As they hung up, Charlie felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about the job he had, it was about the impact he was making in people's lives. It wasn't always glamorous or easy, but it was real. And every time Mark, or anyone else, took another step toward recovery, Charlie felt like he was taking a step with them. That evening, as he sat in his apartment, Charlie reflected on everything that had brought him to this point. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. The road to recovery was long, but it wasn't impossible. And now, Charlie was more determined than ever to keep walking that road, not just for himself, but for others who still needed a second chance. He wasn't just a man who had once asked for $1. He was someone who had rebuilt his life, piece by piece. And the most amazing part was, he was just getting started. Charlie's newfound sense of purpose was both a gift and a challenge. As he helped Mark take his first steps toward a stable life, Charlie couldn't help but feel that he was at a crossroads. Every day, it became more clear that he was no longer just someone trying to survive. He was a person with responsibility, someone whose actions could change the course of another's life. The pressure of that responsibility was sometimes overwhelming. At the nonprofit, Charlie was thriving. He had become a trusted member of the team, often sought out for advice or support by his colleagues. His success with Mark was a point of pride, but it also raised expectations. People were starting to see him as more than just a former homeless man who had gotten lucky. They saw him as someone who could make a real difference. But as much as he appreciated the respect and the acknowledgement, there were days when it felt like too much. It was a weight that pressed down on him, and there were moments when he questioned whether he was really capable of living up to it. It was on one of those days that Charlie found himself sitting at his desk, staring at a blank screen. He was supposed to be preparing for his next client meeting, but his mind kept drifting. He thought about his own journey, the struggles he had faced, and the uncertainty that had once consumed him. Now, he was expected to be the one who had the answers, the one who had it all figured out. The pressure of that expectation threatened to pull him under, just like the weight of his past had once done. "Charlie, are you okay?" It was Jason, his supervisor, standing in the doorway. Jason had noticed that Charlie had been quiet lately, spending more time in his own head than usual. Jason was a straightforward guy, a no-nonsense type, but he also had a genuine concern for the well-being of his team. Charlie straightened up in his chair, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." Jason didn't look convinced. He stepped into the office and closed the door behind him. "You've been carrying a lot lately. I can see it. You've been doing great work, but it's okay to ask for help, you know." Charlie sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I just feel like I'm expected to have all the answers, and I'm not sure I do. I mean, I'm still figuring things out myself. How am I supposed to help people if I'm still learning?" Jason leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. "Listen, Charlie, nobody expects you to have everything figured out. What they expect is for you to keep trying, to keep showing up, and to keep helping however you can. Nobody's perfect, and honestly, the fact that you've been through what you have makes you that much more effective at what you do. You've walked the walk. You get it. That's something not everyone has." Charlie's eyes met Jason's, and for the first time in a while, he felt a sense of relief. "But what if I mess up?" he asked quietly. "What if I can't help them?" Jason gave a small chuckle, shaking his head. "You're going to mess up. Everyone does. The key is to not let it stop you. You pick yourself up, learn from it, and move forward. If you keep letting the fear of messing up hold you back, you're never going to move forward. You're doing better than you think." For the first time in a long while, Charlie felt a flicker of hope. He had always been his harshest critic, constantly battling the insecurities that stemmed from years of failure. But Jason's words reminded him of something important, that mistakes were part of the process. They didn't define him, they helped him grow. "Thanks, Jason," Charlie said, feeling a little lighter. "I needed to hear that." Jason gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Anytime. Just remember, we're all in this together. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." The next morning, Charlie's confidence was restored as he walked into the office, ready to tackle the challenges of the day. He was no longer consumed by the fear of failure. He knew that helping others didn't mean being perfect, it meant showing up, doing his best, and being there for people when they needed it most. He had his next client meeting scheduled for the afternoon. Sarah, a woman in her 40s who had recently been homeless due to a series of unfortunate events. Sarah had struggled with addiction for years, and after a long stint in rehab, she was trying to regain her independence. She had a few jobs in the past but had difficulty maintaining stable employment. She was eager to get back on track, but she didn't know where to start. Charlie spent the morning reviewing Sarah's case file. He was still learning the ropes when it came to certain aspects of case management, but he knew that if there was one thing he had to offer, it was empathy. He understood the struggles Sarah was facing because he had faced them too. The addiction, the job losses, the constant fear of never getting back to normal, he knew it all too well. When Sarah walked in for their meeting, she looked a bit weary, her eyes holding a quiet sadness. But when she saw Charlie, there was a flicker of something more, hope, maybe, or the beginnings of trust. She sat down across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Hi, Sarah," Charlie greeted, offering a warm smile. "It's really good to meet you. I've been looking through your case, and I think we can work together to get you on the right track. You've already done the hardest part, which is showing up." Sarah looked up, her lips twitching into a small smile. "Thanks. I didn't think I'd ever be here again. It's just, I don't know if I'm capable of getting my life back." Charlie leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "You're more capable than you think. We're going to take this one step at a time. You don't have to have everything figured out right now. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at your skills and what kind of work you might be interested in. We're going to set some small, achievable goals. And together, we'll work through the rest." For the next hour, Charlie worked with Sarah, helping her to articulate her strengths and talents. He guided her through setting realistic job search goals, and together they crafted a plan for finding stable housing and securing employment. There were moments of hesitation, moments where Sarah doubted herself, but Charlie was patient, reminding her of the progress she had already made. By the end of the meeting, Sarah was in a much better place emotionally. She wasn't fully convinced that she could turn things around, but she was willing to try. And that was enough for Charlie. As she left the office, she turned back to him with a hopeful smile. "Thanks, Charlie. I needed to hear that. Maybe I can do this." Charlie nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He had helped someone take the first step toward a new life. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being there, guiding them through the dark, and reminding them that they were capable of more than they thought. As he sat back in his chair, Charlie couldn't help but reflect on his own journey. He had come so far. But the road wasn't over yet. There would be more clients, more challenges, more days when he questioned whether he was doing enough. But Charlie had learned something crucial: it wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present, being committed, and being willing to help others find their way, just as he had found his. And that, he realized, was enough. It was the kind of afternoon that felt like a turning point, a moment when everything Charlie had worked for seemed to converge into something real. The sun had just begun to dip beneath the horizon, casting a golden hue over the city. For the first time in a long while, Charlie sat at his desk without feeling the crushing weight of doubt. He had faced challenges before, his own struggles with homelessness, addiction, and the pain of rebuilding, but something had shifted within him. The work he had been doing at the nonprofit was making a difference. Every client he helped, every success story, added another layer of fulfillment to his life. Still, Charlie knew that his journey wasn't just about helping others, it was also about making sure he never lost sight of his own growth. Today had been particularly meaningful. He had worked with a man named Luis, a former mechanic who had fallen on hard times after a series of misfortunes. Luis had been working in a dead-end job at a warehouse after losing his former trade, and he came to Charlie looking for something more, something that could restore his dignity and give him a reason to hope again. Luis's case was a tough one. He had a long history of struggles with alcohol, a divorce, and the loss of his home. Charlie could see the pain in his eyes, the quiet resignation that came from years of feeling like nothing would ever change. But as they sat across from each other, Charlie could tell that Luis was starting to believe in the possibility of a fresh start. "Charlie," Luis said, his voice raw with emotion, "I don't know how I ended up here. I used to have a good life. I had a job I was proud of, a family that depended on me. Now, I just feel lost." Charlie's heart went out to him. He had heard those words before, and each time they struck a chord within him. "I get it, Luis. I really do," Charlie said quietly. But you're here now. That's what matters. You're ready to make a change, and that's the first step. Luis's eyes seemed to soften, his defenses lowering just slightly. I don't know if I can get it back, you know. The confidence. The feeling like I'm worth something again. Charlie leaned in, his voice steady but filled with conviction. You don't have to get everything back all at once. That's not how this works. What we're going to do is take it one step at a time. First, let's focus on your skills. You've got experience in mechanics, and that's something we can work with. We're going to look for ways to build on that, whether it's finding a way to get back into your trade or finding something new that you can feel proud of. You're not the man you were a year ago, but that doesn't mean you're any less valuable now. Luis nodded slowly, taking in Charlie's words. Charlie could see the hesitation, but also the glimmer of hope. After their meeting, Charlie knew that Luis would need time, just like everyone did. But the fact that he was willing to take the first step, that was something to build on. As Luis left, Charlie felt a sense of satisfaction in knowing that he had planted a seed in Luis's mind. The path wouldn't be easy, but at least Luis now had someone who believed in his ability to change, and that belief could be the spark he needed. That evening, as Charlie sat in his small apartment with a cup of coffee, he reflected on his journey. The work he was doing now, helping people find hope, restore their dignity, and rebuild their lives, was everything he had dreamed of and more. But it wasn't just about helping others. It was about keeping himself grounded, staying true to the person he was becoming. Charlie's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Mark, his first client. Mark, Charlie, I just wanted to let you know I got the job. I start tomorrow. I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me. Charlie's heart swelled with pride as he read the message. It was moments like this, moments of real, tangible progress, that kept him going. Mark had been in a place of deep uncertainty when Charlie first met him, but now, he was starting over. He was getting a second chance. Charlie's thoughts drifted to the future. As much as he was grateful for the present, he couldn't ignore the fact that the world outside his office was still full of challenges. His work was important, but there were so many more people like Mark, like Luis, who needed help. And in his own heart, Charlie knew that he couldn't stop here. He had recently received an offer from the nonprofit to become a mentor to new clients. The idea excited him, but it also made him nervous. Was he ready to take on more responsibility? Could he handle mentoring others while still focusing on his own growth? He knew the decision wouldn't be easy. But he also knew that he couldn't shy away from the opportunities that would come his way. He had made it this far by taking chances, by pushing himself beyond the limits he had once thought were impossible. And now, with the support of the nonprofit and his newfound confidence, he was ready to take the next step. The future, Charlie realized, wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. The next day, Charlie sat down with Jason once again, ready to discuss his decision. Jason, ever the pragmatic mentor, listened carefully as Charlie explained his thoughts. I've been thinking about it, Charlie said, his hands resting on the desk in front of him. The opportunity to mentor new clients, it's a big step. But I think it's the right one. Jason gave him a thoughtful look. You've come a long way, Charlie. And I agree. You've got the heart for it. But don't forget, you're still learning, too. Don't burn yourself out. Mentoring is important, but so is taking care of yourself. Charlie nodded. I get it. I won't let it overwhelm me. I just feel like I'm ready to help in a bigger way, you know. I've had people help me, and now I want to do the same for others. Jason smiled, giving Charlie an encouraging nod. That's exactly why you're ready. You know what it's like to struggle, and you know what it takes to get back on your feet. You'll make a difference, Charlie. You already are. As Charlie left the office later that day, he felt a sense of clarity that had been missing for some time. He had decided to take on the mentorship role, knowing that it would push him even further out of his comfort zone. But he was no longer afraid of the challenge. He was ready to embrace whatever the future had in store. The journey he had started years ago, when he had stood on that street corner asking for $1 from Elon Musk, was no longer just his own. It was a journey that was intertwined with the lives of the people he was helping every day. And in helping them, he was finding a deeper sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long, and there would be moments of doubt. But Charlie knew that he had found something worth fighting for, a future where he could give back, inspire others, and continue to build on the life he had created. It wasn't just about the destination. It was about the journey, and the people he met along the way. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change for Charlie. His role at the nonprofit had expanded significantly with his new mentorship responsibilities, and he found himself guiding a handful of new clients through their own journeys of recovery. His inbox was flooded with emails from people reaching out for help, and his schedule was packed with meetings and check-ins. It felt as though the world he had once felt lost in was now brimming with possibilities. Yet, as much as the work gave him purpose, Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that he was always on the edge of something bigger. Helping others through their struggles was rewarding, but he couldn't ignore the nagging thought that his own path was still unfolding. Every client he mentored, every success he witnessed, made him wonder if he was truly fulfilling his potential or just riding the momentum of his past successes. One afternoon, as he was working on a case file for a new client named Eliza, a knock on his office door broke his concentration. It was Jason again, his supervisor, who had become more of a mentor to him than he had expected. "Charlie, you have a minute?" Jason asked, stepping inside. "Of course, what's up?" Charlie asked, looking up from his screen. Jason sat down across from him, a slight grin on his face. "You've been doing some amazing work lately. The team's been talking. We think it's time you start leading group sessions for some of the clients. You're ready." Charlie blinked, surprised. "Wait, what? Lead group sessions?" Jason nodded. "Yes. We think you've got the right balance of personal experience and professional insight. Plus, your ability to connect with people is something we're all impressed with. You can make a real impact." Charlie sat back in his chair, unsure how to respond. It wasn't the first time someone had suggested he take on more responsibility, but the idea of leading a group terrified him. Sure, he had faced adversity before, heck, he had lived through it, but speaking in front of a group, taking on a leadership role, was a different kind of challenge. What if he failed? What if they didn't respect him? "I don't know, Jason." "That sounds huge," Charlie said, running a hand through his hair. "I've never done anything like that before." Jason leaned forward, his voice firm but encouraging. "Charlie, that's why we think you're ready. You've been where they are. You've been through the struggle. You understand their pain in a way that no textbook or training manual ever could. That's the kind of leadership we need." Charlie paused, taking in Jason's words. It was hard to deny that there was a fire inside of him now, a desire to do more, to be more. But that fire also came with a sense of fear, of imposter syndrome. Who was he to stand in front of others and offer guidance when he was still figuring things out himself? But then he thought about the clients he'd worked with, Mark, Sarah, Luis, all of them had been willing to take a chance on themselves, and Charlie had been there to help guide them. Maybe it was time for him to take his own chance. "I'll do it," Charlie said, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. "I'll lead the group." Jason's smile grew wider. "I knew you'd say that. Don't worry. We'll support you every step of the way. You've got this, Charlie." The first group session came faster than Charlie had anticipated. He spent the days leading up to it preparing meticulously. He wanted everything to go smoothly. He'd gathered notes, looked over the case histories of the people he'd be working with, and practiced his talking points in front of the mirror. But nothing could truly prepare him for the moment he stepped into the room. The group was small, just 5 clients. But the pressure felt immense. Each person in the room had a different story, a different set of struggles. There was Angela, a single mother who had been living in her car with her child for months, trying to escape an abusive relationship. Then there was James, a man in his 30s who had recently lost his job after struggling with depression for years. Charlie stood in front of the group, feeling their eyes on him. The room was quiet, but there was a palpable sense of expectation. The same kind of pressure Charlie had felt during his early days of recovery settled over him. "Hi, everyone," he began, his voice surprisingly steady despite the nerves. "I'm Charlie, and I'll be facilitating today's session. I know that each of you has been through a lot to get here, and I want you to know that I understand. I've been in your shoes, and I know that this journey can feel overwhelming. But today, we're going to talk about the small steps, the things we can do to start taking control of our lives again." He paused, gauging their reactions. Angela's arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes wary. James was tapping his foot nervously. Charlie took a deep breath and continued, "This isn't about perfection. It's about progress. And progress happens one step at a time." Over the next hour, Charlie led the group through a series of activities designed to build self-awareness and resilience. They discussed their challenges, their goals, and the obstacles they feared. Charlie shared his own experiences, using his journey as a way to connect with them. Slowly but surely, the room began to loosen up. Angela uncrossed her arms, nodding thoughtfully. James shared his struggles with his depression, something he had never been able to talk about before. By the end of the session, there was a shift in the room, a sense of camaraderie and understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that's what mattered most. As the session wrapped up, Charlie looked around the room, feeling a sense of pride. This was the work he was meant to do. When the group had filed out of the room, Charlie lingered behind, taking a moment to reflect. He had faced his fears and come out the other side stronger. But more importantly, he had given something back to these people, something he had never expected to give: hope. The next few weeks flew by as Charlie continued to lead the group sessions. With each passing day, he grew more confident, his nerves transforming into a steady passion. The clients were responding to him, and Charlie could see the difference he was making in their lives. They trusted him because he wasn't just some professional who had studied recovery, he was someone who had lived it. In the evenings, Charlie would spend time with Mark, Sarah, and Luis, checking in on their progress, offering guidance, and celebrating their successes. Mark had found steady work, and Sarah was starting to rebuild her relationship with her family. Luis, too, had landed a job in a local garage and was working hard to stay sober. Through his work with them, Charlie realized something important: helping others didn't mean sacrificing his own dreams. It meant building a life that could be shared, a life that could continue to grow, with each person helping the other. The ripple effect had begun. Charlie had asked for help once, all those years ago, and now he was the one passing the torch, lighting the way for others. And for the first time in a long time, Charlie was certain of one thing: his future wasn't just his own. It belonged to all the people he was helping, and in helping them, he was finding the life he had always dreamed of. Charlie had come a long way from the man who stood on a street corner asking Elon Musk for $1. A long way from the hopelessness he had felt as he slept in abandoned shelters and scrounged for food. But in this final chapter of his journey, he realized that the true meaning of his story wasn't just about where he had been or what he had overcome, it was about where he was going, and the lives he was changing along the way. Over the past few months, the impact Charlie had made within the nonprofit had only deepened. His group sessions had become more powerful, more real. His ability to connect with people, to meet them where they were and help them see the potential within themselves, was something that set him apart from the others. But it was the relationships he had forged, the trust he had earned, that made the work truly rewarding. One afternoon, after leading another successful group session, Charlie sat down with Jason. They were both a little tired, but the sense of fulfillment in the air was undeniable. "You've really grown into this role, Charlie," Jason said, his tone filled with admiration. "The clients are responding to you in ways I haven't seen before. You've become a leader here, and it's not just because of your experience. It's because you care. You've earned their trust." Charlie smiled, but there was a quiet hum of nerves running through him. "Thanks, Jason. It feels good, but it also feels like there's so much more to do. I can't help but feel like I've only scratched the surface. There are so many people out there who still need help." Jason nodded thoughtfully. "That's true. But don't forget how far you've come. You've already changed so many lives. And I think there's more you're capable of than even you realize." Charlie thought for a moment, looking out the window at the city skyline. There was a time when he had never imagined he'd be here, in this moment, with so much purpose in his life. But now, he understood something. His past, the pain, the loss, the uncertainty, had shaped him into who he was today. It hadn't been a curse, it had been a catalyst for change. A catalyst that allowed him to empathize with those who were still struggling, still lost. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Charlie said, turning back to Jason. "I feel like I could do more, something on a larger scale. I'm thinking about starting a program for people coming out of homelessness, something more than just therapy or job placement. A full-circle program, something that helps them with housing, job training, personal development, and most importantly, a support system." Jason's eyes widened, clearly impressed. "That's ambitious. But it's also exactly the kind of vision you need. It's what people need, someone to believe in them, all the way through." Charlie's heart raced at the thought. He had always dreamed of creating a program that helped people get back on their feet, not just give them a handout but equip them with the tools to succeed. It would be his way of giving back to the world that had once given him nothing. "I don't have all the details yet," Charlie continued, "but I know that this is something I need to pursue. I've seen what happens when people are given the resources, the encouragement, and the belief in themselves. It's life-changing. And I want to create a place where people don't just survive, they thrive." Jason smiled warmly. "I think you're ready for that, Charlie. If anyone can do it, it's you." The idea consumed Charlie's thoughts in the days that followed. He began to sketch out his vision, making lists of potential partners, organizations, and even funding sources. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became. This was the next step. This was the future he had been building toward all along. But even as he made plans, there was still something weighing on his mind. He had never forgotten that fateful day when he had asked Elon Musk for just $1. He hadn't expected much in return, but the encounter had stuck with him, a reminder that sometimes it only takes one person to change the trajectory of someone's life. Charlie had wondered for years what it would have been like if Elon had taken the time to speak with him, to show him the path forward. Would things have turned out differently? Or had his journey been set in motion by the very challenges he had faced? As he sat in his office late one night, Charlie's phone buzzed. He stared at the screen, his breath catching in his throat. It was a notification from social media, a message from someone he never thought he'd hear from again. "Elon Musk, Charlie, I remember our conversation. I've been following your progress. I want to help. Let's talk about what you're doing now." Charlie's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The man who had once been a symbol of everything Charlie didn't have, everything he couldn't reach, was reaching out to him. The coincidence felt too surreal to be true, but Charlie knew this was an opportunity he couldn't ignore. He quickly typed back a message, his fingers trembling with excitement. "Elon, I can't believe you remember me. I've been working on something big, a program to help people coming out of homelessness. I think it could change lives. I would love to talk to you about it." Within moments, Elon's response came through, "I'm in. Let's make it happen." The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and plans coming to fruition. Elon's involvement gave the program the kind of credibility and resources it needed to take off. With his backing, Charlie was able to secure additional funding, recruit the right partners, and build a team that was as passionate about the cause as he was. The program launched to great success, with dozens of people benefiting from the support system Charlie had always dreamed of providing. The work was hard, but every success, every person who found a job, secured a home, or rebuilt their self-esteem, made it all worth it. And through it all, Charlie never forgot the journey he had taken. He knew that it wasn't just about the final destination, it was about the lives he touched along the way. He had come full circle, from asking for $1 to offering a lifeline to those in need. As Charlie stood at the opening ceremony of the new program, surrounded by clients, staff, and supporters, he looked out over the crowd with a deep sense of gratitude. This moment was the culmination of everything he had worked for, the past, the pain, the lessons learned, and the people who had helped him along the way. And standing there, in that moment of triumph, Charlie realized something that he would carry with him forever. He had never truly been alone. The people who believed in him, the ones who gave him a chance, the ones who shared their stories, had been his support system all along. And now, it was his turn to offer the same to others. The future was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace, something to build, one life at a time. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?